Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Saturday, November 6th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Nebraska game is today, the game against Michigan in 21 days. After last weekend's win over Penn State, Ryan Day may have kind of turned some heads when he said that the defense won the game for them. I know people were kind of not thrilled with the defense after the game, but Ryan Day was very happy with it. Watching the game, you saw some of the familiar old issues with defending RPOs, seemingly maybe starting to come back. But when they named champions this week, there were a bunch of guys on defense and only one on offense. So Day apparently meant what he said. So as promised on yesterday's show, I wanted to bring back Buckeye Scoop's X's News guru, Ross Fulton, to try and decode this for us. Ross, thank you for joining me again.
Me too, Tom.
So you wrote this week that you thought Matt Barnes revealed the defensive philosophy moving forward in that Penn State game. So what did you see, and why do you think that's going to be the plan from now on?
Yeah, I think they, generally speaking, mixed. Cover three with some split safety, cover four. The cover four, Meg, we've talked about where they man up the corners, but with a heavy amount of cover three pressures. So you're keeping the three deep shell, but you're bringing 4, 5, or 6 blitzers, or 4, 5, or 6 rushers, I should say. You have your what are called creepers, which are you basically you're blitzing a linebacker or a defensive back and then dropping out a defensive end. So you've got still 4 rushers and 7 zone players, but you've brought a blitz from a non-traditional spot. You have like a fire zone blitzes where you're bringing in extra rushers. So now you're rushing 5 and you're 3 deep, 3 under, or you have what's called a hot pressure, which where Ohio State was particularly effective against Penn State. And now you're blitzing 6 and you're playing a 3 deep and 2 under with those, 200 guys eyeing the quarterback and trying to goal is to get the ball out quickly and make a tackle underneath.
Now, you wrote about the fact that those hot pressures were a part of 2 of the biggest plays of the game for the defense. So can you sort of explain what they did on those plays and how it played out on the field?
Yeah, and so you've got so to the field or the wide side, they basically blitzed the Mike linebacker, Cody Simon, through the B gap between the guard and the tackle, and then they blitzed the cover safety, the nickel, Marcus Williamson and Lathan Ransom through the field C gap. The first play with the first Penn State's first offensive play of the game, Williamson caused a fumble I think actually both he and Ransom, ironically, they're not big guys, but they're very effective blitzing and as run defenders. They do stick their head in there. And so, it makes some sense personnel-wise for them to do that. And then they also ran the same pressure when Tyreek Smith caused a strip sack that Jerron Cage returned for a touchdown. And again, when Smith forced Clifford to get rid of it on Cam Brown's interception. So, one benefit when you're bringing 6, obviously the offensive line has to pick them all up. But even if they do, you're guaranteeing that your defensive ends have single blockers. And, there was a lot of complaints earlier this year about the defensive end performance and, why aren't they getting more pressure? And part of it is, again, when you're predictable, it's also easier for the offensive line to block you and to adjust. And so now when you're guaranteeing them single blocks, you're giving them more of an opportunity to make plays.
Watching the game, it felt like they were blitzing more. And I don't know if that really, as terms of a number of plays or percentage of plays, they were bringing more than 4 guys, if that was really true. But, the additional pressures or the change in pressures, was that aimed at Sean Clifford specifically, that, he maybe wasn't 100% and you're maybe a little skittish with the bad ribs and all that kind of stuff? Or is that maybe going to be a part of the plan moving forward more consistently now? What's your expectation there?
Yeah, I think it's some of both. They've been, I agree, they probably did it more so against Penn State than they have. Although I think it has been a fairly sizable part of the Ohio State scheme since Matt Barnes took over play calling. I do think there's a significant difference in how Sean Clifford plays when he has a clean pocket. He made some really nice throws against Ohio State when there was no pressure. And when he's rushed and he tends to bail out of the pocket. It also, with regards to, you mentioned, Penn State loves to run RPOs. So if you're blitzing guys, you're taking them out of conflict on run pass options. And you're also changing up potentially who the read should be for the quarterback. They don't quite know who has that hook zone, underneath zone, if you will. So I do think all of those lended itself in that game to using those pressures, but I still think it'll be a sizable part of the defense going forward for some of those more structural reasons.
You mentioned the RPOs there, and that was something that watching the game, I mean, I am no Ross Fulton. I'm never going to pretend to be a Ross Fulton, but to my untrained eye, it looked like a lot of the success Penn State was having in the pass game was off, RPO kind of looks. Now, what struck me as strange was Penn State couldn't run the ball a lick the whole game. Like, I think they averaged 1 yard a carry. I mean, why would Ohio State be playing the run aggressively enough to open up the pass on an RPO? Why would you not just kind of sit back and kind of encourage them to try to run? Like, what's the thinking there if you're an Ohio State defensive coaching staff member?
Yeah, I mean, so some of it, in the second half, Penn State did a lot of that. Those just wide receivers, like smoke screens, where they put trips into the short side of the field. And, defensively, that's always a challenge because you have to decide, do we commit our numbers into the boundary over those 3 wide receivers and leave the wide field more open, or do we play it more balanced? And so, they gained some yards on those. I don't think anything significant, but, Ohio State wasn't really, they rolled the corner up over it, but they weren't really willing to fully match that to the boundary. Some of it is just the way that the defense is designed. They did have some of the linebackers, what's called like freeze, like sit sort of on the RPO. But there's just still kind of a gap in the middle zones between like the safeties getting depth and those linebackers wanting to play the run. And so, they're Ryan Day after the Alabama game, he's like, we got to stop the run first. And that's been pretty much a consistent mantra from him. And so I don't think that they're ever fully willing to commit to we're going to sit on the RPOs, which I think they could do because they have the defensive line to do it. But, I think there's been a lot of improvements, and that was one of the major issues before the switch was just, getting gashed by RPOs, and they've done a lot of things to help. But, it's not foolproof. And I will say that I think Penn State really, most of their success came on third down off of drop back passes, hitting those intermediate hook curl zones against linebackers.
We've talked a lot today about, how what we saw last week will impact things moving forward. One of the things that's going to do that most directly is the targeting ejection of Steele Chambers right at the beginning of the third quarter. So we missed basically the whole second half against Penn State. And now because of the rule, he has to sit out the whole first half against Nebraska. Ryan Day talked earlier this week about the fact that he didn't think that was quite fair, that it's sort of a bigger penalty because you missed the whole half and then you're missing a whole nother half. You're basically missing a whole game. Whereas a lot of times you could be in the last play of the first half and you just miss half. So, he is obviously going to miss the first half of this Nebraska game. He's also seemingly turning into one of the best linebackers they have, if not the best linebacker they have in some ways. So how do you think they try and work around that, not having him in the first half this weekend?
Yeah, I think they're just going to have to kind of muddle through. I mean, you would like to have him because, Nebraska, Scott Frost does do a nice job, like sequencing plays and putting linebackers in conflict and getting them in space. I mean, for his faults, Adrian Martinez is a good runner, and there's going to be lots of option. It is unfortunate because I know there's been a lot of angst amongst Ohio State fans about Chambers not starting, but my takeaway was he started the second half with Cody Simon. So to me, that was like the sign that that's what it's going to be going forward. But I think in general, it's just going to come down to, I think they're going to have to use more of their split safety scheme against Nebraska, more cover 4 to get their safeties involved against the quarterback run game. Because that's also always a limitation of a single high safety is you're just down one if the offense wants to run the quarterback. And so now if you got the 2 cover 4 safeties, I know it sounds maybe counterintuitive, but both of them can then come down to either side. So you've matched up numbers. And so I think you'll see more of that against Nebraska. And I think they'll just try to again limit the explosive plays.
Was there anything against Penn State that looked to you like it was a significant concern moving forward with the defense? I mean, anything that either changes what you think the ceiling for this team could be, or maybe open them up more for a possible upset in the next month? Or was it kind of like it's okay. I'm no more concerned than I was or feel better than I did 7 days ago about this team.
Yeah, so I actually do agree with Ryan Day that the defense won that game. I mean, I think that they were put in some bad positions. The offense couldn't quite get out of its own way despite moving the football, and the defense forced turnovers. So, I think it's just the way they play zone coverage is always going to leave themselves vulnerable to those middle of the field throws. Particularly that's why it's so important for them to keep at least mixing up coverages so those underneath zones change. But like as I talked about in my article, they have the linebackers in cover 3 spot drop, which means they're dropping to a zone, keeping their eyes on the quarterback. That's not how most teams run zone coverages these days. Most have them pattern match. So, you're within your zone essentially, but you're playing man on receivers within your zone. Because, if there's time, the quarterback can manipulate you if you're just spot dropping, right? He can move you one way and throw it back behind you to the other. And so I do think they're getting better, but I don't think that, it's not like they're ever going to shut those plays down. But that said, like, they don't have to. I mean, they're already well beyond what I thought was possible this year. And I mean, after Oregon, they were 41st in SP plus, the advanced stat metric on defense. They're now up to 15th. So that's a big jump. And, because of the different pressures, they're at least giving the quarterback different looks, changing his viewpoint, and they're getting better defensive line play as a result of it. So I think they are good enough to complement the Ohio State offense, but the Ohio State offense has to be the driver of things.
And I think the last time I looked at SP Plus, they were number 1 in offense as well. Is that right? I think.
Yeah. I mean, they were like before Penn State, they're like 4.5 points beyond the next team. So, the offense is rightly what they should be counting on. They need the defense to complement them. But that goes back to our discussion yesterday of offense has to put the ball in the end zone. And then we're having a definitely different discussion because obviously as a defense too, the more of a lead you have, the easier it is to play defense.
Yeah. And I mean, I went back and looked, I think before last season's playoffs at what the statistical profile of teams had been going into the playoffs and like who actually wins and how bad can one side of the ball be to still be a national championship contender. Number 1 and number 15 would put you comfortably in that area. So, all right, you officially have my permission to continue carrying and thinking that Ohio State might win the national championship this year. Still a possibility. We'll find out more today when they play at Nebraska. Ross, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to.
So we will have our usual pregame coverage. Tony Gerdeman, Kevin Noon, and I will have our usual pregame coverage on YouTube before the game today at noon. We'll have that'll be kind of mid to late morning. I think I don't think we have an exact time yet, but I would expect sometime around 8:30, 9 a.m. something like that. We'll have our usual pregame show. That'll be youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. The best way to make sure you don't miss it is to subscribe to our channel. Just click on that bell on YouTube. That'll subscribe you to our channel. You get notified as soon as we start going live with our live pregame show or live postgame show. Every time we post a new podcast, you get notified. All that good stuff. It's all free at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you a little bit later on.